class, my name is Bridget, and today I will be arguing that the federal decriminalization of marijuana will benefit the American public and the U.S. government. So many state legislatures have actually already changed laws on the legalization and decriminalization of marijuana. However, the federal government classifies marijuana as a Schedule I drug, or a drug that has high potential for abuse based on the Controlled Substance Act. So while some states have made changes to the legislation, the use, sale, and possession of marijuana is still prohibited and punishable by law at the federal level. Decriminalizing marijuana at the federal level will benefit the American people by allowing law enforcement to better use time and resources on violent crime, by increasing availability and safety for medical treatment, and by collecting taxes on the cannabis market. So for my first claim, decriminalization of marijuana will decrease the number of incarcerations and allow law enforcement to focus on more violent crime. Don Young, a professor who has a doctorate in government and political science, says, since 1972, about 16.5 million Americans have been arrested for violating cannabis laws. Over 80% of these arrests were made for minor possession charges. In addition, currently 1 in 8 inmates are incarcerated because of cannabis. For these minor possessions, if we stopped arresting them at this level and incarcerating them, prison space would be freed up for criminals who are either felons or have more violent arrests. A study conducted by the ACLU found that between 2001 and 2010, police made over 7 million arrests for marijuana-related activity, or 1 apprehension every 37 seconds. Law enforcement can invest more time and resources in more violent crime or gang-related crime, or also allowing for time in courts of law to see more serious cases and have less delay in trials for violent crimes. For my second claim, the decriminalization of marijuana will increase its availability and safety for medical treatment. The aforementioned Dr. Young says that currently more than 60 U.S. and international health organizations support the use of cannabis for medicinal purposes. The University of California Center for Medicinal Cannabis Research has found that the THC and CBD compounds in marijuana have significantly reduced the nerve pain in patients with cancer, diabetes, HIV, AIDS, and multiple sclerosis. Medical marijuana has also been proved to increase the quality of life for patients treating mental health disorders like anxiety and PTSD. Government regulation on marijuana can create a standard for quality and safety control so that users can trust the source of consumption. This benefits public health and safety by putting less pressure on the medical system as a result of possible waste substances or overdoses from getting marijuana from places that are not regulated. For my last point, the decriminalization of marijuana will save government expenses and open up tax collecting opportunities. Cannabis dispensaries at the federal legal level must be registered with the state that they are in, licensed, and regulated. RAND Corporation, a nonprofit global research organization, suggested that marijuana at one point made up roughly 20 to 30% of drug cartel revenue. Through legalization, drug cartels will lose much of their revenue and sales will transition to a legal market. With marijuana federally decriminalized, the government can also legally impose taxes on its sale. In a 2010 study from the Cato Institute, they found that legalizing marijuana would save the government $17.4 billion annually. Half of that would come from taxing marijuana like we would for alcohol or tobacco. These tax revenues could then fund programs that benefit public safety or help people who may have been abusing the substance in the past. New York Senator Chuck Schumer just recently introduced a bill this year to federally decriminalize marijuana, and it would designate a set amount of tax revenue into a Treasury trust fund for what he calls to support what he calls the small business concerns of men and women, and supporting the socially and economically disadvantaged individuals working in the marijuana industry. The U.S. government has invested copious amounts of time and money on restricting a drug that kills fewer people than tobacco and alcohol. It's time that we utilize this opportunity to decriminalize marijuana and rather regulate it for public good. The decriminalization of marijuana at a federal level benefits public health and safety through medical benefit, increased tax revenue, and a more available time and resource for law enforcement. These are just a few reasons why the decriminalization will have a positive impact on American society. Thank you.
Okay, the proposition's pretty clear. The contents is previewed, although it's the preview, I won't say it's disguised, but it's not as clearly highlighted as it could be. I don't think there's anything wrong with suggesting that the structure that you're going to talk about has a structure. You follow it in the body of the speech, so why you kind of hide the numerical signposting at the beginning is not quite clear. There's plenty of controversy on this, so this seems like a reasonable topic to be arguing about. On the notion that it's going to decrease a variety of problems related to incarceration, of the 16 million people who were arrested since 1972, you don't have any data about how many of them were incarcerated. You do have one piece of data that talks about incarceration that says 1/8 of the people who are in prison now are there for marijuana-related issues, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's possession. So I think that there is some information here that is, making an inferential leap that may not be supportable. The data about the number of arrests in the previous decade, that's kind of mimics the same sort of argument. The notion that arrests mean incarceration is necessarily assumed here, but I'm not sure that that's the case, especially in places like California where we have lots of people, and arrest usually meant the equivalent of a traffic ticket, not incarceration. The argument on the second point concerning the availability of marijuana for medical uses, you've got some good information here that suggests it has a variety of medical uses. I think what's missing here is the demonstration that the federal prohibitions are limiting medical use. Since there are drugs that have been approved by the federal government that contain THCs and CBDs, then the question becomes, why is it better to let them out? Like you were talking about unregulated, you say it would be regulated, but if it's a pharmaceutical, shouldn't it be regulated by the FDA, which is supposed to regulate those pharmaceuticals? You have to explain why the FDA regulations are onerous or problematic. Maybe they limit the ability of people to do research on marijuana. That would be the kind of thing that would make that argument work a little bit better. You're just kind of going, well, if it has some benefit, let everybody use it any way they want, and that's counter to the argument that you're actually making here, where you're saying it would be better regulated if it was, because you're saying all people out there going, who are sick, they're getting bad dope on the streets from wherever. How would that change? I'm not quite sure on that one. So I think there's an argument there, but it's not quite developed enough. And then the issue about government revenues and that sort of thing, about the cartels, for instance, the idea that they're going, in essence, that's where a third of their revenues comes from, why they would not continue to just have revenue from this, and now it would be a legal business for them, I'm not quite sure. There's a presupposition here that they would in some way be damaged, and I'm not sure that that's demonstrated. The argument about the savings, you do have some information here about how much money would be saved or revenue would be created by taxation issues, and I thought that was pretty good. You have to be a little bit careful. Sometimes when you're speaking, you have a tendency to have your voice drop out at the end of sentences or when you're making a transition to the next idea. A lot of people do that. I'm not exactly sure why it is, but I've noticed that in most of my classes, that there are people that have a tendency, they get to the end of something and then they just kind of trail off like that. And you do that a couple times. Okay.